All right, we are now recording, so
Okay,
careful what you say.
Yeah,
we're ready to get started then?
no, we'll wait for
no.
a couple minutes, but
Yeah.
we just want to make sure we get the recording caught.
Okay, just let me know.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey,
Oh,
where's Jonathan this morning?
Which John?
Jonathan Ref?
No idea.
Here's an example of ClickBake for Nerds. Wired has an article with a headline that reads, "The Healing Power of JavaScript."
ah. All things to all people.
I need that.
We'll get a little dose of some JavaScript today.
Saw the headline, had to click on it.
Okay, it's time to get the meeting started. So I'm going to mute everybody, and Kent, you should unmute yourself.
Yep. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, and so first up, we've got a pretty busy agenda today. First up, we have Kent Searight, who's going to talk to us about the benefits of a robust error capture and reporting system. So Kent, the floor is yours. Kent, unmute yourself.
There we go. Okay, can you hear me? Good.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, today I'm going to demonstrate a system that I've been using for a while for handling errors from the point of catching an error to logging it. I found that good error handling makes a really big difference in how quickly and efficiently you can address errors once you find them. And as I think you're going to see later, it can also boost your end users' confidence in your solution, especially after they get an error. An error happens. On a side note, I want to say I originally intended to show you in much greater detail the techniques and scripts I use to handle errors, but then I realized that I had about 4 hours of content, and so I wasn't going to be able to show you FogBuz integration very much. And I thought that that was really, really important. So I've scaled back the handling errors part to just a demo that shows you what happens when an error occurs and how it's handled without diving into the methodology very deeply. I think you'll still find it pretty interesting. I hope so. And if maybe it'll whet your appetite for learning more about it. And if so, I might come back and do another one just on the techniques. So having said that, let's dive in. Okay. So there's going to be 3 parts to this presentation. I'm going to show you an extended error coding system. Then I'm going to show you an error handling demonstration. And finally, we'll finish up with how to integrate Filemaker with FogBuz so you can log errors directly from your solution. Okay, so some of you might be asking, why do extended error codes? Doesn't FileMaker have enough error codes? Well, yeah, they do, but there's error codes that I use that FileMaker can't do natively. And basically what they're for is for defining errors that FileMaker can't do because it doesn't know your intention. They're programming errors. They're when you do something wrong programmatically that FileMaker is okay with it, but it's probably going to result in a problem with a script. And so error codes, this extended error code provides a consistent way to define these specific errors. So I basically do 3 different types of extended error codes. Number 1, programming errors. Those are the big ones. And you know, I found that most of the time when I get errors in my scripts, they are not FileMaker errors anymore. They're these extended error codes. They're programming errors that I'm catching. And I'll give you a perfect example. I use error -101 quite a bit. 1 or more required variables are missing. You know, we forget to either define a variable or we call it the wrong thing. We're expecting a different name variable. And quite often when you don't have a value that you expect, it can cause problems. Worst case scenario, it causes data corruption. And that's the kind of stuff that I think keeps us, many of us up at night, worrying about data corruption. So, there, like I said, programming errors, there's a good example. Validation errors are another good example. For instance, you have a user input dialog where you're asking for a number of, let's say 1 to 30. It needs to be an integer. You're having the user enter it into a global field and they enter -1.8 or something like that. Well, that could really wreak havoc in some scripts because you really need to have a value that is within, like say, a particular range. So this would be like why I would use error code -503. I'd return that if the user is inputting a value that just is not acceptable. And then I've got behavior and business rules, and this is where errors get more specific to the particular solution. I'll give you a good example of that. Error code -6, record is ineligible to be modified. So in the FileMaker solution that we're going to look at, where we're going to see an error happening, there's a table I have in there called transaction. And what I do in that table is I keep track of inventory parts in, inventory parts out. Every time something moves within inventory in the various parts, I log it. And a lot of times I create these transaction records in advance because I know that they're going to be used. And that's part of the planning, how I do planning in the solution that you're going to see. So anyway, a transaction record that has not been recorded is flagged as pending. So one of the first things that I'll do before I write to that record when I'm performing one of these complex transactions is I'll say, has this transaction already been recorded? I'll do a test for that. And if it has been, then I've done something wrong because I shouldn't be on a transaction that's already been recorded. So I'll return like a -6. And that'll tell me, hey, you did something wrong. You should not be on this transaction. This is done. It is kind of a programming error, but it's really specific to a rule break. I'm trying to enforce a rule within the database. So with that, let's dive into the script that's going to fail here. Here we're looking at a solution that I created for, it's a vertical market solution for the wholesale nursery industry. And it does a lot of things. One of the things that it does, we're looking at right here, is the inventory lot system, where in a nursery, you're growing your inventory. So it's a little bit different than a lot of other widget parts kind of inventories, where, you know, in manufacturing, where you're not dealing with things that grow, that die. You've got a lot of dynamics going on in this kind of an inventory system. So one of the, we have events right here, the production events. We sowed this by machine. We lost a few to germinate, or excuse me, to insects in the germinating stage. Right here, we're going to do a transplant, and when this button appears this way, it means that this event can be recorded. So let's record this this transplant event right here, and let's see what happens. So when we record this event, we're going to see what's going to happen is a lot of parts are going to be moved around from inventory. And here are the parts that are going to be used. We're going to be using a bunch of containers, some tags, and some trays. And we're going to be adjusting their inventory levels. I think that there's a total of 10 records that get modified in this transaction if it completes successfully. So anyway, let's save this. We'll run this script here. Okay, so just as planned, we've got an error. So this is the first part of the error handling that I want to point out to you. It's what the user sees. So, oops, something went wrong. Yeah, I know that doesn't tell them much, but it's a nice segue into the rest of. I found that it's a nice segue into the rest of the error message. So the next part, the event was not recorded. This sets users' expectations. This tells them, hey, you know what? This event was not recorded. You don't have to start looking around to see where parts pulled from inventory. You know, none of that happened. So the user knows, I mean, it's not a good thing that it wasn't recorded. It's a bug, and they probably need to do this to keep up with production, but at least you're letting them know, hey, you're giving them expectations. Then there's the last part of the message. The error's been logged and Sembrance support has been notified. This is, I found, very reassuring to the user, because now the user knows that 911 has been called immediately. Help is on the way. You know, again, no user wants to see an error, but at least they know, you know, it's being taken care of. They don't even need to report it at this point. So we're going to say okay here, and I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to go to Safari here. And this is the FogBuz web interface. This is just a dummy project that I do testing in, and I'm using for this demo. And as we can see over here, there's an alert badge, or a little alert icon, I should say, and it's turned red, and that says something happened to let me know. Now, I also got an email, or I get an email every single time there's an error reported here. So let's take a look at this and see what exactly happened. So a case was created in FogBuz, and it has error -101. And if you'll recall, that means a variable is missing or empty. And it was created by the bug reporter, the auto error reporter. So let's take a look at what actually got recorded here in FogBuz for the error report. We'll start with the top here. The script button _ record a scheduled event received the following error from a subscript. Oh, okay, so this is where it all started. The script record a scheduled event received the following error from a subscript. Oh, okay. So now we're down to here. The script record a transplant event received the following error from a subscript. Okay, now we get to where the error was actually reported. The script calculate lot status ID found the required variable quantity immature to be empty. Okay, well, that's pretty informative. Now we know why this script returned an error. We just don't know why it's broken. Okay, so part of the error report that was prepared, the rest of this, we see there's a JSON object right here attached to the bottom of it. And it has what was going on at the time that the error was recorded in the script, calculate lot status ID, what the application was, what layout it was on, who the user was, etc. And down here, I want to bring your attention to this part where we've got the script parameter that's being passed in. It shows that I'm passing in everything that I expect, and look, quantity immature. Wow, okay, so I do have a value there. So that's kind of interesting because it says I don't have it in the variable. And one of the things I do, just a little bit of clarification here, is I create local variables typically for from the JSON that I pass into scripts. I do that for readability so that I can see what's happening in the data viewer real easy. So I look at this and I see, wow, okay, we were going to record 46 products to be transplanted and quantity, and they were going to be quantity immature. That's what we were going to, that's what the status was going to be there. But this is telling us that quantity immature is empty. Well, if you notice, this is spelled correctly, and this is not. So all of a sudden, we have what I think is a wealth of information here. Oh, by the way, you might also notice the username. This shows that it's being run on server, that it's being performed on server. And as many of you know, it can be a little more difficult to debug things when they run on server. So this is really helpful. We don't have to start running this on client to see what's going on because we already have a lot of clues here. So it looks like we have a spelling error right here in the way I've defined the JSON key. So that means that even though the error was reported here, the source of it is probably here or here or here. Well, so let's take a look at script workspace here. And this is the script where the error was reported from, okay? And here we look, here's where quantity immature is being set. And here's the key name that we're expecting. Well, as you can see, there's 2 M's in there. So that's why that's why this variable is not being set. And that's being caught right here because I use this, I've got a custom function for validating required values. And I put the names of the variables in quotation marks, in quotes, so that I can evaluate them. And I use it's a excuse me, it's a recursive function that excuse me, pardon me. It's a recursive function that lets me that identifies any or all values that are missing. It says what's missing and what the name of it is. So it gives me a heads up there. So anyway, we know that there was a value being passed in here. It's just the wrong name. So now let's look at record a transplant event, which is the script that called the script where the error was actually reported. And here we go, calculate lot status ID. So if we look at where I'm building the JSON here to pass in, you'll see that quantity immature is misspelled. there's the problem. So if we just put an M in there and we save this script, we should be able to run this now. And voila, it's fixed. So this, I think, illustrates the value of having, I've got the call stack here that shows where everything started, where the error was reported. With some pretty simple code in the script, I'm checking to see, do I have everything I want? And if I don't, it tells me I don't have it. And since I'm also in the error report, passing in other valuable information, like what's the script parameter, I quickly determined that the problem lies here, and I knew pretty much where to start looking for it. So one thing I want to point out here is by the time this error was caught in calculate lot status ID, about 1,800 lines of script had already been called. We'd already gotten through about 1,800 lines of code. So if this just failed right here, and we said, oh, something went wrong right here and didn't pass in the rest of this information, we have about 1,800 lines before there to figure out where it happened. With all this information I passed in, granted, some of it's more than we need, but sometimes you never really know what you need to debug an error like this. So I just include everything. But this little tidbit of information with this right here provided us with a lot of info, and okay, where do we start looking and where do we correct it? So I hope that this gives you a pretty good idea of what I see as the value of good error handling. And this system, I do want to state here too, this system is really easy to implement once you get it set up. So there's not a lot of overhead to this. It's a couple of custom functions that handle pretty much all of this. Well, there's one custom function that builds all of this. So anyway, so now how did we get this into FogBuz? Well, here's the FogBuz part of the puzzle right here. And I'm going to go back to, back to Keynote here. And here's what you need to get started if you are going to report errors in FogBuz. First of all, obviously, you need a FogBuz account. Then after you create an account, you need a project to send bug reports to. You don't really need it. If you just send a bug report to FogBuz and don't tell it which project, it'll put it in the inbox. I like sending it right to a specific project. That works much better for me because I know, oh, it's a bug in this project. Okay. I would suggest using a dedicated email account for error reporting. In other words, don't use the same email that you use to send photos to Aunt Claudia or something like that, because you don't want to mix up email accounts. I have an account called Auto Error Reporter or Error Reporter, and all it does is it reports errors. Then after you, after you create this account, in FogBuz, you'll want to create a user account that has that email account that you created here, and it has permission to create cases in the project. And once you have that, you're pretty much ready to start getting to set up the integration with the FogBuz API. So the FogBuz API reference, make note of this link right here. It's api.manuscript.com. Don't use, if you were to Google FogBuz API, you're going to end up with all kinds of instructions on how to do it in XML that you're going to be scratching your head and saying, what? This is not what Kent showed me in the demonstration. So make sure you use this right here. The API is super simple. It's about as basic as you can get. But some of the reference material, unfortunately, is incorrect or misleading. And this is where I'm going to save you some time from going through some of the headaches that I had in initially setting up what should have been a super easy integration. So let's dive into that right now. Here's, you can set, here's the FogBuz homepage. It's just fogbuz.com where you set up your account. Here is the API reference right here. And okay, so in order to start using the API, you need a token. And you're going to get that token by this will be your specific account name right here. They're using API Sandbox as the example here. But this is going to be the URL. You're going to do a post to this URL with logon at the end. You're going to put the email account name of the email that you created for error reporting and the password. And it's going to look a lot like this. You don't need to do this in FileMaker. I don't see any reason to do it. You need to get the token once. As a matter of fact, it even suggests right here, we encourage you to reuse your tokens rather than get new ones all the time. So, just keep reusing the same one. Of course, change it once in a while for security purposes. But other than that, just get it and keep track of it, make a record of it, because you're going to need that in your FogBuz integration. So your successful response is going to look something like this. You're going to have your token and the token value right here. So then after you get your token, you can do a validation if you want. I'll leave that up to you if you want to do that. It's always good to know, yeah, that is going to work. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is to make a call to list categories. And when you do that, what you're going to end up with, this is one of the places where I'm going to save you a headache. This says the HTTP request is list cases. That is not true. Over here, it shows the correct one, list categories. That's what you want. I wish they did a better job of keeping up on their, or fixing their mistakes in this reference, but it is what it is. So list categories is what you want. And when you make a call, you're going to end up with something like this, where it shows what your category IDs are. Since we're creating bug reports, I should say, you're going to want to use the one for bugs. And I think it's always one by default, but it's always best just to check and make sure. So you're going to get back something that looks like this, IX category equals 1. Next, the next thing you're going to want to do is, if you want to send to a specific project, is you're going to list projects. So again, this is a super simple request, and this API couldn't be easier to use. You're just sending to this URL with list projects at the end, and you're sending your token. It couldn't be any easier. I'm going to switch real quick for some of you that maybe don't work with curl as much. I would recommend using Postman for doing your testing and debugging, working out, getting your token, getting your getting your project lists, stuff like that. So like, for instance, I've got this post right here for listing projects. Oops, there we go. And like I said, like you saw, all I'm doing is I'm sending the token. These are variables in Postman. And I just send it, and lo and behold, it returns what the project ID is. Acme Database is what I'm sending it to. And then here are a couple of other projects that I've got that email address account has access to. So yeah, I highly recommend using Postman for that kind of stuff. Okay, so once you get your project ID, your token, of course your token first, your token, your project ID, know which area you're going to send it to. Now you're able to create your cases, and this is where you will do this in FileMaker, because like I said, you don't need to do this more than once. So I would not, I think it's a waste of time putting this code into FileMaker. Just do this in Postman or Terminal or whatever you're comfortable using to use curl. So let's see. So if you look at the API manuscript, your API reference here, you're thinking, okay, so if I go to cases, this should be where I create a new case. You couldn't be more wrong, unfortunately. This is another one of the pitfalls of poor documentation on how a very simple API can be set up. You want to be here, Bug Scout. This is how, I'm not sure why there's such a big difference, but whatever. This is how you do it. You use the Bug Scout API. And if you click on this, this will take you to page not found. So just don't even waste your time. Here's what you want right here. Here's your request. Nothing is required except for scout description and the token. So it couldn't be easier. If you don't supply anything else, it'll just end up creating a case in your inbox, and it'll be very generic. So we're going to be a little bit more specific in where we want it to go. So here's what the request is going to look like right here, or maybe this side would be better to look at over here. We're going to do a post. Again, this is going to be your user account right here. And it's just going to, the URL ends in new, okay? We're going to send the token. We're going to tell it which project we want it in. Area is optional. I send to area 99, which is miscellaneous. And again, I believe that's just FogBuz's default number for that one. If I wanted to get really slick about where I'm reporting from, whether it's from orders or inventory or whatever, I could say which area, but that's not important to me. Category, that's one, it's the bug. Here's your title, which if you'll recall from this is the title right here, obviously, and here's the error message, or excuse me, what do they call it? The event. Here's the event right here. Okay, so you might be wondering, what is scout description and why is that required? Okay, so think of that. That's your unique identifier that defines that particular case. So if FogBuz sees if you make a request to FogBuz for a new case, and it already sees an scout description with a value that it already has, it adds on to that case. Okay, so if you have an error from a certain script or error code something from script whatever, and you have that as your description, then all error codes of the same error code from the same script will end up in the same FogBuz case. It just adds on to the case. If this is completely unique, it will create a new case. Hopefully that makes sense. And I can show you some examples of adding on to a case later if we have time. But anyway, so there is, in a nutshell, how you write the curl requests for creating cases in FogBuz directly from FileMaker. Now, let's see, hang on. Okay, so here we go. We're going to create a new case. Okay, so here we go. This is a new case from Postman from FMDiSC. This would be a bug report if it were real. And here I've got the scout description, and I've just called it XYZ3, which I believe does not exist in the database, or excuse me, in FogBuz at this point. So when we do this send right now, we get back status 200. Okay, it looks like it executed correctly. And we come over here and we show a red alert icon. And this is a new case from FMDiSC. Okay, so this is exactly what we just sent to it. Oh, actually, this is the perfect time to show you what happens when we send the same scout description. Let's do it again. And so now we go back to Safari. This case has updates. Refresh it. Ah, there we go. So the bug was reported again. So there's how scout description works. It's just the unique identifier of that case. And you define whatever rules you whatever rule you want to either add on to cases or create new cases. So let's see. So I'm going to go back to FileMaker now and go back into the script workspace and just show you real just general overview of how we get an error report from FileMaker into FogBuz. So I'm passing in a JSON object as the parameter, and these are just custom functions I use to get JSON values from JSON from the script parameter. So I'm getting the case title, the case event. Here's my unique identifier that I have defined the value of in the script that calls this, I think from the log script error. I'm doing it right here. This is just a custom field that I have in FogBuz. It tells me what the version of the FileMaker solution is that I'm reporting a bug on. As I think if you'll recall, I mentioned the area. That's whether it's, like you can divide a project up into different areas, like in the solution that I showed you. There's an order module, there's an inventory module, there's different modules, and I might say which one it's from. I usually use 99. I use that as the default. It's miscellaneous. That works for me for most intents and purposes. So anyway, so here's where I'm building the JSON object that I'm going to send to FogBuz. I keep I keep some of the information, I should say, like the project ID, the token, in a table called database behavior that it's off limits to users. I use it to control the behavior of the database of the FileMaker solution. So anyway, you can see that I'm just wrapping this in. I'm creating a JSON object right here, putting the title in, the event, the description, the version, so forth and so on. And then when you get to actually, sorry, I should clarify this. When you actually get to sending it, you just use insert from URL step. And here's all I'm sending. I'm telling it to post. I'm telling it to expect JSON for the data. And then I'm telling it for data, the -D here, I'm telling it to use this FileMaker local variable, data JSON, as simple as that. If you're not used to using the insert from URL to send JSON and use variables in it, you need to, if you define something, the data in a variable that you're passing to it, you have to prefix it with the @ sign, or else it won't work. It won't be recognized as a variable and you'll end up with it failing. So that is pretty much it for how to get the error report into FogBuz. So let's see, that's pretty much the demo. I want to leave a little bit of time for question and answer. It looks like I'm actually running a little bit ahead of schedule. But I just wanted to, so this is my conclusion, or my conclusions for benefits of robust error handling. And I think some of you might be able to relate to these. It reduces reliance on end users. I'm sure, you know, we've all had the end user, they send you an email or however they contact you to report problems. It's broken. What do you mean it's broken? The database doesn't work. FileMaker doesn't work. Okay. Can you be more specific? Yeah, I click on a button and I get a weird dialogue. Okay, we've probably all heard this before. Sometimes getting information out of end users can be, it can be a little bit painful. Some are better than others, but when you have a good error handling system, you're actually taking the onus off of, away from people who are not developers, who aren't programming savvy, who really don't know what you're looking for. All they know is they have a problem. You're taking it away from them and you're handling it yourself, and you're saying, oh, something went wrong. And here's what happened. And, you know, you might be able to, you might need to still contact them and say, you know, you might have very specific questions, but you're not trying to get, you're not trying to pull teeth to get some information on what actually happened. You're also going to learn about bugs. You're going to have an awareness of bugs that end users don't even notice. Like, let's say you have a script where you go to object, and if it doesn't go to the object, it's not the end of the world. The user probably isn't even going to notice it. They might have to do an extra click to switch a slide or something like that that you intended for them to go to automatically. You don't even need to let them know that there was a bug, but this will let you know that there's a bug, and you can actually just improve the user's experience of bugs that they don't even know about. This is a biggie, the third one, third benefit that I have listed here. It lowers the risk of data corruption. I've had data go bad, data get corrupted in databases because I haven't caught something. And, you know, I'm sure that's happened to more than me. It's probably happened to some of you. It's a nightmare trying to solve that. And then you've got all this downtime later where you're massaging the data back into place and maybe putting in values that should have been there in the first place for it to work right. So this really helps eliminate, or not eliminate, but it really lowers the likelihood of data corruption. It reduces a lot of time debugging, as you saw. Now, granted, the error demo that I showed you, that was staged. So I had a heads up, I knew where the point of failure was. But even if I didn't know where the point of failure was, with the information that I created or that was created in the report, that's an awful lot of useful information about what went wrong and where I should start looking. And finally, like I mentioned earlier when we saw the message come up to the user, it instills confidence in your solution. The worst thing that can happen in your solution is you get an error and your user goes, "Oh man, that's not good." But if you're telling them, "Hey, help is on the way. I already know about your error. We're working on it. We're going to have a fix in place very, very quickly." And the bonus of what I just showed you, again, my apologies for not being able to do a deep dive into how I'm doing some of this stuff. Some of you will probably figure it out, or probably already figured it out how I'm doing a lot of it. But once you create a system like this, it's a breeze to use. It's just copy and paste some lines of code into each script and have a consistent way of passing errors back through the stack, and it just works. There's not a lot of overhead to it, and an awful lot of benefit. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. We've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Kent, that was fantastic. Anybody have questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I put it in the chat and using choose for a Boolean test. I just never seen it that way before. So
Oh, yeah.
Light bulbs just kind of went off. That was very cool.
That might be some old code. When the choose function came out, I wanted to make sure that I used it a few times, probably overused it in a few places, just to make sure that I grokked the idea of what actually happens in choose. So instead of using like a numeric value of or numeric range of values as choose is intended to be used, I just used it there to make sure I grokked the true false concept of it, of when to do something with choose. So don't read too much into that.
I just thought it was a very cool way to do that, because I rarely use the zero value of choose in anything. I almost never have anything that needs to be zero, like choose the month name. There's not going to be a 0 month number. Right. So it's like, oh, okay, this is very cool. I like it.
Yeah, cool, good. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say it looks really awesome, and I was just thinking I need to roll in some bug tracking. I haven't committed to either FogBuz or anything else, so it's really cool to see the integration. I may give it a try.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I've been using FogBuz for about 12 years now, and I find that using a software development management system is super helpful. Even if you're working alone, you can write your stories, your user stories for features, put them in there, take a look at them, review them as you're developing a feature, and say, okay, make notes as to progress. Okay, I'm going to do this, and this is why I'm doing this. which is always helpful to look back on later when it's a year from now and you look at a script and you say, why am I doing this? And you look back at the case. One thing I might mention also is a lot of times I'll put the case number of, if it pertains to a particular script, like say a feature that I develop and it uses, a script or 2 or 3 or 4, I might put the case number in that has to do with that. That way, when I look back at it later, I can say, why did I do this? And I go, oh, yeah, I've got these business rules. Yeah, this is why I'm doing that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Kent, Tim Owen here in beautiful Portland, Oregon, where we have a sunny day, although there's pile driving going on a construction project next door. So if you hear banging noises, it's that. Found it fascinating. Sorry?
Did you say you were in Portland?
Portland, Oregon, yes.
Oh, same here.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm up in the Pearl. But anyway, I found it a fascinating sort of case study. I was a bit unsure of the relevance of the misspelled sort of variable that you used as an example. It was very clear how the process worked, but how, but that was a coding error in your script, and I'm not sure how relevant that would be in trapping a user error in a real world, mature solution. I guess you've got a vertical market solution for wholesale nurseries, and it seemed to me it would be more common to have some sort of user input error rather than an error in the script, unless you're doing development, on an in production solution.
Right. Okay. That's a good point. That is a programming error. It has absolutely nothing to do with the user. But how many programming errors do we see end up screwing up a solution that the user has no control over? Typically, okay. So here's what I find with the programming errors. When I trap for them and handle them the way that I just showed you, I catch 99% of them in staging, in testing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But you know what? Things sneak through, especially when you're doing, when you have a feature, this is where I found where they really sneak through. When you have a feature that you've already developed, it's been in place for a while, and you modify that feature. Well, you've got regression testing that a lot of times you miss things in regression testing, especially in a very complicated solution. So something might sneak through to a programming error that you didn't actually see in testing. And so hopefully, if you did your error trapping, if you're looking for errors in all the right places and you did the handling correctly, at least the user has a heads up and they know that, hey, something went wrong, and you're notified right away. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. As I said, I just wasn't sure what the applicability of the particular example you used to illustrate the process flow.
I might have chosen a better example. I get your point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we all do, make modifications to existing solutions, and it is a beautiful way to trap for that when you can't test in every circumstance yourself, and your users basically have to be doing your bug testing for a solution that's actually in production. So I see it's a beautiful way to handle that. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Cool. Well, thanks for the compliment. Appreciate it.
And I think you could probably trap for just about any type of error that you might predict might happen in your scripts, right? Whether it's past variables or anything else that might contain improper information. So I guess one of the strengths to something like this would be that the individual developer, we generally know where our blind spots are. Like, there are mistakes that you always make or that you
Right.
often make. And no matter how hard you try, you're going to keep making that same kind of mistake. It's just something that's, we all have that, right? We all have that thing that plagues us, whatever it is. So, I guess you could, come up with a set of things that you always want to, that are the most likely culprits in your own style of coding, and then trap for those things in every script, right? And then
Exactly.
and create your own set of error codes for those.
Yeah, and that's exactly where that table of error codes the custom error codes that I use, that's where it came from. Is I kept seeing the same errors over and over and over again, the programming errors, the most common ones, and so I built created a table of error codes specifically for the ones I keep seeing again and again and again. And so that's how that extended error code table was born.
Ken, Ken, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Michael. Yeah.
That was a very interesting presentation. I'd like to ask you how long it took you to come up with that whole solution.
But the error handling, or the FileMaker solution itself.
The error handling.
About 12 years.
Oh, okay.
No, seriously, it's been a work in progress for a long time. I went down a lot of different roads, and like, how do you get the call stack back? Things like that. How do you do? I actually came up with pretty good ways of handling it 12 years ago, but they were kludgy. Over the years, I've learned how to make it super easy to implement them. I would just change a couple of things here and there to make it easier to implement. So yeah, I mean, I started doing this about 12 years ago with an extended error coding system, but to get it to where it is today, like I said, I've got one custom function that creates that entire report. It builds the stack, it records the error, where, the specific error, what it is. So yeah, it took quite a while, but now that it's done, it's a piece of cake, and it has benefit. Even the old kludgy versions benefited me along the way.
Sure, absolutely. It's very impressive. Bob Shockey mentioned something a few minutes ago that I thought was interesting about mistakes that we all make repeatedly. And I find myself constantly typing some particular words. I mistype them every single time.
Right.
So what I've done to correct that is I put the mistype into Typinator. So every time I mistype it, it types it correctly, which is an amazing time saver.
Yeah,
it really is.
Totally. Yeah, I get that, believe me.
Thank you.
And one thing, I'm pretty good with errors. So all the errors that I've made they've led up to this, and I think that I don't know. I think errors, if you learn how to handle them well, you get to be a much better developer, because we all make errors, and the better you know how to handle them, and the quicker you can debug an error, then I think that's a sign of a good developer. Not necessarily how few errors you write, but how you can handle them and how you can fix them super fast.
Agreed.
Anything else? We got 4 more minutes.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I have another one. Ken, you said that you've been using FogBuz for a long time. I remember you telling me that you were using FogBuz years ago, I understand that it works particularly well for this because you've worked with the API and you figured out how to use the API to achieve everything you want. Just out of curiosity, when you decided to try to connect those two things together, to use the API and connect FileMaker to FogBuz, did you think about any did you explore any other systems, any other APIs for any other similar support systems like FogBuz?
No, I didn't. You know, like I said, I've used FogBuz for years. I've also been in corporate environments as a FileMaker developer where they use Jira and Mantis also. And I don't know that they have APIs, but I would assume that they do. If I recall correctly, Bob, you use FileMaker to track your bugs. Is that true or not?
Yeah, we just have a FileMaker database that lives on our server, and you know, the nice thing about doing it that way is that it's really easy. You know, we can just put a report issue, you know, thing somewhere for the client. We do it differently in different solutions, but you know, they can just tap that and it immediately grabs the layout they're on, the record they're on, all that stuff, and passes it into a FileMaker database. And so we've already got some advanced information that we can use.
Okay, good. So you're doing kind of the same thing just for the FileMaker solution.
Yeah, I mean, it does present problems when you start running into like right now, you know, we've got people in our client base who are still a little bit too old in the versions. You know, the IT undertaking for, you know, a large number of users means that they're going to be behind the curve on that. And then that means we can't upgrade that server to a later version of FileMaker because there'll be compatibility issues. So
you use the FileMaker API.
Well, yeah, we're looking at several different solutions, but the point is that, you know, there are pitfalls to any way of doing it, including a native FileMaker solution. So,
sure.
You know, you have to pay attention to those for sure.
Yep, definitely. Yeah.
Sometimes for debugging, it's nice to, I mean, if you're working in FileMaker debugging and having your bug outside of FileMaker is great too. Just having a different, it's not going to crash. You don't have to compete for, you know, script space or what, you know, those things if you're doing a FileMaker based bug solution.
Yeah. Years ago, I did a debugging, or excuse me, a bug tracking solution in FileMaker, and that's why I stopped using it, because I found myself having to get out of FileMaker, like get out of Script Debugger to make notes in it because it was in FileMaker.
Well, that was a great presentation, Kent. I think we're going to have you back for a deep dive on exactly how to implement something like this in the quickest way possible.
Cool, I'd enjoy it.
Yeah, so maybe in a couple, 3 months, we'll have you back and do another presentation. So thanks again, really appreciate it. Anybody have any quick announcements before we do our little breakout rooms? No announcements?
What announcement?
Just anything of interest to the group?
FileMaker announced using Ubuntu for server now. Public.
Yeah, that's the CentOSs. Did everybody, has everybody noticed that the latest version of the Acrobat reader has, the update for that has broken the ability to view PDFs and containers in Windows?
That happened last month, right before my presentation. Was that a month ago or two?
Yeah.
Sounds like it hasn't been resolved yet.
Well, there was always the issue with the native version of the PDF kit, but that was usually gotten around by installing Acrobat Reader. But I guess in the last week or so, Acrobat has pushed out an update that has just straight up nuked the ability to see your PDFs in FileMaker at all. So.
Okay, good to know. If nobody else has any other announcements, I'm going to go ahead and put everybody in a breakout room. So you can
I have a minor announcement. Angel City Data, we're actually going to be moving into new offices pretty soon, and we're going to be having a garage sale of just some old used office equipment and computers and so forth. So for any of my LA peeps, look for the list. We'll probably throw a PDF up there of some stuff, and if anybody's interested, come on by and go shopping.
Okay.
Well, since David Knight just popped his head up, I wanted to just let him and everybody know that his interview with Fireside FileMaker has already had 411 downloads, which is the fastest number of downloads for any guest we've had so far. So well done, David.
Nice.
Thanks, Michael. It was really, really fun talking with you and John, Mark, and what a fantastic series you guys have got going there.
Well, thank you. And if anybody in this group of esteemed FileMaker developers would love to come on Fireside FileMaker and talk to us as a guest, we've got a big audience now and we'd love to have you. So just send us an email at info@firesidefilemaker.com and we'll schedule in. It's what you want to talk about, what you want, what you're passionate about, not what we're interested in.
Okay, sounds good. With that, I am going to create the breakout room so you can all spend a few minutes chatting. See you in about 10 or 12 minutes.
Sorry for joining in late. I didn't realize it was going to be breakout room.
Do we have people hanging on here as an unbreakout room?
Yeah, there's a few people who don't get assigned. I'm usually the host. Apparently can't join a room, so I'm stuck here all by myself.
I was on the phone, so I didn't hit yes because I figured if that phone doesn't stop ringing, it'd be rude. Then again, someone was doing dishes. All right, I'll go back on mute until everybody shows up again.
Hey, Peter, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
You here to support Colleen?
I am indeed. Apparently, I may be called upon for color commentary.
Okay. Well, we'll be back into the meeting here shortly. We're in the middle of breakout rooms right now.
Jolly good. I just wanted to make sure that I was here on time and ready. I will put myself on mute and scroll myself away.
Okay.
Left too soon, right in the middle of a question.
Well, you didn't have to. I mean, you got a minute to close for the rooms to close.
I know, but you know, when it says okay, we're just trained to click on okay.
Finish asking your question about the large data set.
You
gave us the environment, but what's the large data set question?
So the large data set is I'm going to get into mostly static tables that could have tens of millions of records. And I do need to periodically look through them, but the transactional data is only adding a record, never a query. It's all my backend slow timing. So I'm kind of curious if anybody has experience kind of at the tens of millions.
Can you give me an idea of what's in the static tables? What kind of data?
4 or 5 fields, mostly text, all text, small data sets. It's name, email, city, state.
So tens of millions of records, small text in 4 or 5 fields should be fine. It's going to come down to how you're accessing it.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. And I'm, as I mentioned, I'm less concerned about the accessing. I'm more concerned about the transactional side of records being added. But in my context, I think that adding a record is simple. It's the index update that gets to be a challenge. So that would be where things might bog down if I add the 100 millionth record.
Are you adding tens of millions of records, and over what period of time? I mean,
I'm adding one at a time, but they could be coming, hundreds of transactions per second. Well, I don't know what's going to be per second. I've done that many.
I think that's going to come down to your server hardware.
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. It's now time to go on with our next presenter. So I'm going to mute everybody, and Colleen, feel free to unmute yourself and share your screen. So we have Colleen Hammersley. And Colleen, I'm dying to know why you're using the separation model when the rest of the world seems to be moving away from it.
It's the original
That's not
plan
the
here.
topic, Barry.
What's that?
I said, that's not the topic.
No, I know, but I want to know.
Hey, I love the separation model.
And there are still reasons to use it, many. But we can get into that afterwards. Oops, I forgot to put the dogs away. But today, we're going to talk about Brilliant Books, and we're going to talk about the changes and modifications we made when rewriting their POS system. And I do have joining me today, I see in the chat, a masked Peter Macon, who is the owner of Brilliant Books. So that if you have any questions, and we've got plenty of time for questions at the end, he's here to address them if I can't sufficiently answer your question. So Brilliant Books, for those of you that may not know, is a retail establishment with a bricks and mortar presence, as well as a strong online presence. Since the store opened in 2007, every customer was asked for their email address. So the email marketing effort began on day one. Outreach to schools to supply book fairs, local conferences to provide book stalls, and establishing relationships with various community organizations and book groups was also a focus. In 2013, Brilliant Books Monthly, their flagship subscription service, was launched. So multi-channel retailing was the vision from the start. When the seeds of these efforts began to firmly take hold, the first production bottlenecks began to appear. Fulfillment. Despite having selected one of two bookstore-specific, top-of-the-line, best-in-class software packages to use for the point-of-sale services, which included inventory management and CRM functionality, the reality was that the process was both labor-intensive and error-prone. And in a retail business, labor turnover averages over 60%, compared to 19% across all industries. So training becomes a thing. This
Uh-oh, it looks like, Colleen, you're frozen.
is quite simple. Our input is the sale, what's been ordered. Those items must be purchased and received so that we can then deliver them to the customer either via a shipping service or in person. The plan: identify the existing pitfalls. What's really causing the problems or delays in the process? Codify the results. In a perfect world, how should things just work? Eliminate unnecessary decision-making on behalf of the worker. If our business process states that something should be printed, don't ask, "Are you sure?" Just do it. And finally, automate everything. If the task can be accomplished by the system without human intervention, make it so. Digging a little deeper in the process, the initial source of the sales comes through one of the sales channels. Depending on the source, the reliability and accuracy of the data varies. And when the channel involves interaction, the output can either get better or worse. The output of the process is fairly straightforward. For 3 of the 4 channels, the customer dictates the output, while for subscriptions, the service constrains the output to shipping. I put an asterisk there to remind me that one of the early decisions made was to discontinue the ability of subscribers to just drop into the store and offer to pick up their monthly book. This ad hoc courtesy extended by the customer added complexity and proved problematic. So, identifying the pitfalls. As you may have noticed in the earlier animation, the point of sale system is simply not designed for these purposes. It was designed to meet the needs of a traditional retail bookstore, which may, on occasion, sell items not currently in stock. The industry term for this situation is a special purchase order, or SPO. As the name indicates, the process within the POS is clearly special or unique, and thus expected to require special handling and a special process. Both online and subscription sales must be processed through the POS. So initially, we decided to tackle just the subscription channel. After the initial sale of the subscription, which takes place in the POS system, the management and execution of the process was handled outside of any existing software solution. Enter index cards. So by taking this piece, we were able to add value beyond the fulfillment process. The subscription service itself is fairly well defined. A subscription is sold for a defined length of time, 6 or 12 months. When a subscription is sold, the initial transaction deliverable is a preferences card. This is then completed by the recipient of the subscription and returned to the store. Once transcribed. the name, mailing address, telephone number, etc. In reviewing and discussing the manual process, we were able to agree on a perfect world set of rules which could be codified and baked into the system. Once the rules and processes were agreed upon, we could identify those processes where we could simply apply the rules without requiring staff intervention or confirmation. Interestingly, agreeing to use standardized packaging as opposed to recycling boxes that came from supplier shipments turned out to be a cost savings. The money spent on packaging was less than the staff time spent storing and reusing boxes. Decisions like this lift the cognitive burden and ensure that the subscriptions travel through the process as designed. Finally, we identified the areas in which automation would be most beneficial. Which mundane tasks were staff asked to accomplish that could, with a bit of code, be removed from the process? What information could be surfaced proactively to provide staff a heads up and avoid last-minute decision-making? The resulting system included functionality that tracked the sale of all subscription items in FileMaker. Because the existing POS system did not have API integration, this included a daily export of sales data, which was imported into FileMaker for processing. This result transferred new subscription sale items into the BBM system. With these items in the new system, foundation records are created and ready for the receipt of the preferences card to trigger the initiation process. A preferences card is scanned using a SnapScan scanner and immediately loaded into a FileMaker table. And here I want to give a shout out to Adam Arnson at Full City Data for providing that little widget that makes that little process sing. The staff member then enters the ID from the back of the preferences card, and the card scan is linked to the subscription record. This ID is the internal sales ID from the POS system, and that ensures that the card we are processing matches the product that was sold. It also ensures that we only process the purchase once. The staff member then reviews the card, enters or finds the subscriber information, assigns the subscription to a bookseller, and enters a start date. Once the subscriber, bookseller, and start date have been set up, the subscription becomes active and a welcome email can be sent using a customizable template. After subscriptions are configured, a bookseller can access their queue or list of work and books they need to select at any time and make selections for those recipients. They can slice and dice their list in a variety of ways. Any tags apply to the subscription itself, while picking directives are unique to the month. While the POS was external to FileMaker, a cutoff date was set for making selections. The buyer then would export a buying report to be imported into the old POS. All purchase orders were flagged to indicate that the destination was for BBM, rather than being put out on the shelves for customer browsing. And when these orders were received, the mailings were prepared from the FileMaker system. The mailing includes a customized letter and postage label, which are produced by scanning the ISBN into a process selection screen, and then clicking on the gear icon, which generates and prints the postage, as well as a customized letter. This package could then be handed off to a junior staff member for packaging. The final step was to produce and process the sales report. In this case, the POS did not support importing into a sale. So the FileMaker system produced pages of barcodes, which were then scanned into the POS and sold at 100% discount in order to reduce inventory. While there was still a good bit of manual interaction between the existing POS and the new BBM application, this was a huge improvement. Booksellers also gained the ability to easily review not only selections made for the current subscription, but could link to previous selections or to subscriptions for other family members. We have situations where both husband and wife have a subscription, as well as siblings having concurrent subscriptions. And in both cases, it's very helpful to review those selections sent to other family members. We also configured the system to check for duplicate selections across all of a subscriber's subscriptions, so we can avoid sending the same title twice. On this screen, the booksellers can also see the customer responses to previous selections. Any feedback from the customer is entered by the staff member who processes the email or answers the phone. So having a way to efficiently communicate this information to the bookseller who's making the next selection was another win. Phase 2 of the fulfillment problem was to tackle the remaining sales channels. In each case, this means dealing with individual orders placed either in-store, in person, in-store, on the phone, online, or as a wholesale order. Again, because the POS support for this functionality is basically non-existent, the process was riddled with errors and best intentions gone wrong. So we walked through our process again. The POS did have support for attaching a customer Brilliant Books is located in a vacation destination. So an attempt was made to determine if the customer was a visitor from out of town, and if so, where, or the customer might identify as a seasonal resident, in which case we were interested in capturing both their non-seasonal locale as well as the town they associated with as their summer home. The POS does not support data validation for these fields, nor was it easy to determine when the data was last updated. As long as the same person was doing data entry, there might be a fighting chance. But this is retail. Many hands in the pot and a creative variety of usage resulted in a mess after a few years. When it came to online sales, the source data was more reliable, but as there is no integration between the online system and the POS, human error and creativity is reintroduced. I'll note here that the option to ship from warehouse using Ingram's direct-to-home service meant that data entry had to be made into yet another user interface, yet another possibility to introduce mistakes. And critically, any user who had permission to process a direct-to-home order through Ingram's website also had access to the entire purchasing functionality. So not really something that you'd be inclined to dole out to a part-time bookseller. When taking an order, booksellers were often uncertain when the item was likely to be available for the customer. By exposing the buyer's process, we came up with a simple schedule for booksellers to follow. Working through this process also exposed an opportunity to capture the customer's need by date, which meant that the book buyer was able to make better purchasing decisions. We also did simple things like standardizing the shipping method and enforcing required fields. And while creating the pull sheet process, the wrapper, which is the big image you see there on the screen, was redesigned to facilitate the physical arrangement of items behind the register, ready for customer pickup. as well as redesigning the physical arrangement of partially fulfilled orders in the receiving room. While seemingly mundane, standardizing these practices meant that other team members could easily understand the status of the work in progress. It also facilitated the ability of other staff to assist. The new UI was designed to accommodate the process, which meant that we no longer had to rely on the interpretation of data in the notes field. Big win. In addition to requiring specific data elements, we added address verification so that booksellers could confirm their entry and clarify addresses with customers when needed. It did surprise me how often customers had a desire to claim that their city was other than the zip code indicated. By implementing dynamic pull sheet generation, this meant that as a web order was processed, a report was printed to a central printer. Anything printed to this printer signaled to staff that stock needed to be removed from the floor, and the destination for that stock was clearly indicated on the report. This reduced the incidence of selling the last in stock item via 2 sales channels. On the automation end of things, we were able to create an integration with Ingram's direct-to-home service. This allowed the system to send an order to Ingram, which would be fulfilled on their end, eliminating the need for the store to physically purchase, receive, and then ship out the product. While this service had been available previously, it required using the UI on Ingram's customer website. Automating the process was another time saver. Ingram is the back-end supplier for Amazon, so API integration for a variety of endpoints exist. We began to take advantage of as many of these as possible. By accessing the item detail endpoint, we created a dashboard for the shipping staff member to quickly determine what needs to be done next, identify bottlenecks, and pinpoint problem orders. The resulting shipping module addressed many issues and was well received by the staff members, but it did leave them wanting more, and soon. So the next step was to create a new POS. We started with the same process, but we all agreed that the new POS functionality could not be deployed in bits and pieces. Each major component could be created and tested individually, but the deployment must include all of these major components. Fortunately, the owner had a clear vision of the end result and understood the process required to get there. You'll see that point number 1 under vision is reliability. Another major issue with the previous system was lack of trust in the data. Because the UI and UX allowed various paths to be taken for different processes, the data presented to the user and the system was often unreliable. One of the daily procedures had been for the opening staff member to conduct an inventory review based on the previous day's sales. This was to ensure that the stock levels were in fact correct in the system. As you might imagine, this could be a time-consuming process, and auditing the inventory system shouldn't be a daily affair. The other major components to the vision included enjoyability and ease of navigation. Again, based on the screenshots you saw earlier, you can understand those requirements. Many of the staff had been introduced to the process, and having seen the results of the fulfillment project, were on board to wade into this deeper project. But as with any redevelopment project, the biggest hurdle was overcoming the "that's the way it's done" mindset and coming to a clear understanding of the process required to obtain the desired result. As you may have guessed, a majority of inventory consists of books. Inventory can be added by several different processes, but in each case, the identification of a new ISBN to the system initiates an API call to Ingram to obtain the basic field data. Again, the title, the author, list price, vendor of record, that kind of thing. Once added, users can complete the data entry options as needed. The API call for the image is distinct, so we rely on the user to initiate that pull. Other data points, such as the department and section, are subjective, so oftentimes a user will consult Ingram's system for additional nuances prior to assigning those fields. There is also a call to refresh the Ingram stock levels. This aids the buyer in making purchasing decisions. So a new inventory item would typically look like this. Notice that the image is already in there. Pulling images in is one of the staff faves. It's a bit of magic. If inventory is added via an import from Edelweiss, which is the industry standard electronic catalog system, department and section values are auto-populated because the Edelweiss system allows each store to customize BISAC code assignments to match the store's preferences. One of the never-ending processes for the business is purchasing. Knowing an item's sales velocity is a critical component. The nature of the business also means that any sale could contain items which need to be purchased in order to complete the fulfillment process. And then there's also a need to anticipate the required stock levels to meet the needs of the subscription service. Quick search functionality was added to allow the buyer to run predefined queries for various categories of purchasing. These queries take into account the evaluation timestamp, which is updated for each inventory item with specific transactions, a sale, a customer return, and adding something to a purchase order. All of the data to aid in the buying decision is available from the inventory screen. So the buyer can complete that process without ever leaving this screen. Each week, the American Booksellers Association puts out a list of the indie bestsellers. It's important the store know these books. The buyer needs to evaluate the stock levels and make purchasing decisions, and booksellers themselves need to know where to find a book on the shelves. Bestsellers are located in what's known as the promo zone, not on the shelves in section. The system uses date-based tags to identify these books and allows bulk tagging by pasting a list of ISBNs into the system. Suppliers consolidate orders when shipping. So more likely than not, a shipment will contain items from multiple purchase orders. The previous system required that items in the shipment be sorted and received against the PO. Again, a labor-intensive and error-prone process. By constructing the system to receive to invoice, an invoice is typically the shipment, the receiving can be processed more accurately and efficiently. We also added functionality that allows the receiver to immediately report issues to the supplier. Small tasks that in the past often didn't get done, costing money in unsaleable inventory. The UI also informs the shipper of the next stop for each item. Does it move to the subscription service for processing? A green arrow indicates the book is street smart and that the receiving date is prior to the date the store is allowed to display the book for sale. Section is displayed as well as any promo zone information so that the receiver can pre-sort the books on the cart for placement on the floor by the bookseller. By creating a returns process that is user-friendly, we were able to make a big impact. The Overstock return process involves pulling books from the shelves and placing them in a holding area in the back room. Books get pulled from the floor in order to make room for new books on the shelf. When a book is removed from the floor, we now immediately log that book into a return. An Overstock return with a status of open means that any books assigned to that return are located in the return shelves in the back room. When an Overstock return is actually shipped back to the vendor, the status of the return changes and the on-hand quantity in inventory is reduced. Previously, there was no way to track which books were sitting on the return shelves. So time was wasted hunting for books that the inventory stated we had on hand. Because we also link returns to physical credit memos, we know when a shipment goes missing. And storing the tracking number allows us to track it down and make a claim if necessary. Automation of the receiving issue returns also save times hunting for books that are sitting on the damaged shelf awaiting replacement or credit. And the reporting of these issues is now a button click rather than staff having to make phone calls or type in and create new emails to report the issues. There are a number of processes that happen in the background, either by scheduled server scripts or initiated at the end of a user-driven process. Some of these were previously user tasks. For example, generating the bestseller report or adding inventory, while others were enhancements which anticipate problems or questions, the time card review, and the daily reporting of sales numbers. Automating updates to inventory stock numbers on the website was a no-brainer and makes you wonder why manual updates were ever considered okay. Integration with Myemma, the email marketing application, was also a big time saver. A majority of email communication is directed through a general life@brilliant-books.net account. So we also integrated this account into the system. As emails come in, they are downloaded to a triage area where staff can then file, respond, and forward to another staff member. This system allows staff to stay on top of customer service requests and log these interactions. On the accounting side of things, we automated as much as possible using the QuickBooks plugin. We also added UI to assist booksellers in the closing procedure. At the end of a shift, getting out the door should be as easy as possible. So we even added generation of the deposit slip to be included in the cash bag for the morning deposit. On the management side of things, we added a cash flow projection module. For managing staffing schedules, we integrated Dayback and added sync functionality to Google Calendar to support the staff's ability to check their schedules from home. We also tied scheduled shifts to actual time cards for a more accurate understanding of projected versus actual labor costs. Data for payroll comes out of this system. It's not an automatic integration. There's a human step there, but the report comes out, so it's straightforward. And we added customized dashboard views for each type of user with quick links to review each item. This is the owner's dashboard, and this is an example of a bookseller's dashboard. And this is the staff links favorite. One of the more time-consuming efforts for management was to remind staff constantly that they should be entering in their staff, making the selections for their staff favorites, and also a description of why they enjoyed the book. And by putting this on the dashboard, it means that if they have a few minutes free, it's very simple and easy for them to do this task. So that's an overview of the functionality. I'm going to exit out of this and open it up now for any questions. And as we do that, there are also a few more features that we can demo in the system. So first, I guess the question is, does anyone have any specific questions either for myself or the owner?
Well, absolutely. Yes. I mean, that was a very interesting presentation, Colleen. And if Peter's in the background somewhere, hello, Peter. How do you guys compete against, as a small bookseller, against the big chains? And you're in a tourist area. Do you get a large percentage of your business online now, or is it mostly people that come into the store when they're traveling or on vacation and then subsequently keep buying from you? How does that work?
I guess I should take this one. Yeah, in the beginning, it is people who visit the store and decide that they like the store and they want us to be their long distance local bookstore. However, since the pandemic, there's a lot more people who are just simply looking for businesses that that they feel have their values and that they want to support. So we're seeing a lot more folks using us online that we haven't seen before, and a lot more queries from different groupings across the country that looking for an independent bookstore that can do the things that they want them to do.
Has the pandemic shifted the balance of business dramatically? One would expect it to have.
Yes, quite a bit. In fact, there was a lot of independent bookstores that didn't really have a good web presence, because they in the past used to consider that online equals Amazon, which is therefore evil, and everyone should enjoy the idea of it's bricks and mortar and not really the 21st century. So the bookstores that do have websites, and there are a fair few of them that do, have made out very well in the pandemic, because we were able to be open even when we were forced to be closed. So it was it's worked out quite well. But having this system and having a robust website as well made it. That's the only reason that we managed to survive, I guess, through all of this.
What about are you physically open now, or are you still shut down due to a lockdown?
We are physically open, and we're open for appointments only. Oddly, our particular county, Grand Traverse County, had its record number of cases, like since the pandemic began, in this week. The last few days of this week have been a record. We've got record hospitalization. So, 26% of us are vaccinated, but it seems like the rest of us are going to be in hospital. So there's that. Yeah, it's tough up here. So we're not open. We're only open for appointments.
I have a question. Hi, Peter. It's Beverly.
Hi.
I know this is specific to you, and I see parts of it that really lend to your setup of where things are in your store. But have you been approached by others to say, we love this, can we purchase it?
Well, I think you are correct that it is something that is designed specifically for the way we work, and has been specifically molded that way so that it works well for us. I think philosophically we're quite a bit different to a lot of other folks, which is why it makes it a little different in terms of how they would do things. I know that our buying process is not something that most bookstores would do. It's quite specific to us. So I'm not sure. I think there are elements of it that could. Depends whether Colleen ever needs new work, but I can't get other work on this one. So hey, no idea.
Yeah.
If you were to ask the developer would say this could easily be implemented for someone else. But in some ways, right, it's a competitive business, and it is a competitive advantage. So I have not pushed that.
Yeah, that's true. But just saying what you used before was so awful, and this is what I find, is that I have a client who buys a package and it just doesn't do it. And so I just wondered if you had been broached by others. But yeah, don't sell it if it gives you that leg up. Don't sell it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
May I offer a comment by, in essence, flipping the lens? As a patron of Brilliant Books since it first opened, I must say that their service is superior. It is a gold standard to which all companies should try to adhere and emulate. If I find a book that I might be interested in, usually having seen a review in some place like the Wall Street Journal, I simply send Peter an email and I say, is name a book available? And most of the time it is. I ask him to order it. It appears along with its invoice, which I'm happy promptly to pay.
Thank you, Stephen. That's I think that's kind of the thing. When people do ask, you know, how do we compete against larger organizations? It is that personal touch that we try to give. So thank you, sir. I'm glad that works for you.
Colleen, there's a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you can see them, but I can read them to you if you can't.
If you could do that, because I had the chat window up anticipating, but I don't see it now.
Okay, Alexi's asking, can subscribers fill out their preferences card online? Seems like might be a missed opportunity, if not.
Oh, I like this question.
You want to take it,
love
Peter?
This
Go
question. I love this question because yes, from an IT person's point of view, why the heck isn't that card online? Just fill it out. And we actually did a thing a while ago where we actually did illustrations of these cards. When you're actually trying to pick something for someone personally, how their handwriting looks, what they've marked, how they've marked it, what detail they've put, the notes they make, all of that tells you an awful lot about that human being, way more than you'd get by just reading a slider. That's why we do it. It's deliberate. We know we could do it online, but we do it deliberately this way.
Interesting.
And I'll just note that there are Brilliant Books monthly subscriptions for kids, and they fill them out. And when you see a card filled out by a 12-year-old and they're passionate about something, it does come through in the way they talk about it. They draw little pictures, they put little hearts on things, you know, they'll draw a little stick out at your tongue on things. I mean, it's you just couldn't get that from an online form. And
okay.
Anything else?
We've got another question here from Alan. He says, can you talk about how to do credit card processing in the store and with the subscriptions? Do you automate the subscription payments?
Sure. So for the credit card processing, we went through Clover, the Clover system. And I think, Alan, we had a discussion about this ages ago when I was trying to crack this nut. They offer an API integration that meant that I felt I had better control over it, and it went through our banks. The rates were still decent rates because it all flowed through there. So it was just a matter of buying equipment. So it's an API, when they select a credit card to process the sale, it's an API call that sends the data out, and that is automatically delivered to the Clover unit, which sits in front of the customer. So again, especially now in today's day and age, having a unit that the bookseller doesn't have to touch in order to process the credit card transaction was a good call on our part early on. And the other question regarding the subscription service is prepaid. So you purchase in advance 12 months or 6 months or 10 years of books. And then the way it goes through the system, now that everything is integrated, when we send you a book, a sale is automatically generated in the background at 100% discount in order to reduce inventory and get the cost of goods sold reports back in line and so forth. Does that answer your question?
Alan will have to answer that.
Yeah, we're dealing with a subscription company that has like 5 different subscriptions, and we had to move it off of Shopify to integrate it with WooCommerce so we could have much more control over the frequency of billing them, whether bi-monthly or monthly or all the different types of subscription services. And so we integrated it with Stripe. That's what I was sort of wondering. It gave us a lot more flexibility to than Shopify did by using WooCommerce and integration with Stripe. And the other issue was integration with ShipMonk or a fulfillment service. Do you guys use a fulfillment service, or do you fulfill it yourself?
We fulfill it ourselves. That was the first part of the presentation. So no, that's two things. I think the type of subscription service that you're dealing with is what we had considered at one time, and this was a long time ago. There are certain people, for example, who want the new James Patterson book whenever it comes out. And that's not something that we can have fidelity or control over, right? So the idea was to sign them up for that service and then have pre-authorized that card to pay for that for that book when it comes out, right? Now, I did the research there on that, and authorize.net allows that. And our website is through the American Booksellers Association because it integrates with Ingram on the back end. So that's a huge, huge deal. And that goes through authorize.net. So if we decide to pursue that as well, they have API calls that would allow you to do that. One of the difficulties specifically in the bookstore industry is that we've been in contact with the web developers at the ABA. And while they are really good at their job and tech savvy and so forth, when I say things like, I'd like API.
You froze.
Yeah, we've had a few
You're
of
just
those.
frozen.
She'll come back here in a few seconds.
I guess so. I wonder what she's saying.
She's probably talking about you, Peter.
I know.
We lost
Hopefully
you there
it's
for a
nice
second,
things.
Colleen.
We lost you there, Colleen. After you said API, that was nothing. We then had a chat amongst ourselves.
So I'm so sorry. I live in the middle of nowhere. What can I say? Authorize.net supports the kind of things you're looking for, Alan.
No, I know they can tokenize things, and we have a
Yeah.
default for keeping the token. And the other thing is, you mentioned Ingram DTH. We have a bookseller that sells books for schools, and they want to integrate. They've been using Booklog through EDI, but they want us to automate it and also integrate with. We've already integrated with Ingram just to get the book information, but now they want us to be able to use the iPage to use to purchase the book. Do you have a vendor portal that you use to buy your books from?
We do go through iPage, and the system is completely integrated with Ingram's backend for book purchase and receiving, as well as the DTH. DTH is just another way to order. So we can do bulk orders through Ingram and their electronic system, and then that goes all the way through fetching the invoices at the end.
Great, that's good. Great.
I think, as I recall, Ingram is another one of those services that you actually have to pass their verification test, right? So the same thing with some of the gift card suppliers. You can't actually deploy. It's not like Stripe, where it's like, if you make the call and we're happy with it, you're on your way. They actually want you to pass the test and send me a printed receipt that shows that you put the things on there that need to be on there in the whole 9 yards. So there's hoops to jump through.
Yeah, but it's good to know that Ingram has an API for vendors. The Booklog thing is EDI. It's an old technology, and we're trying to get away from that.
Well, yeah, Booklog was one of the systems we looked at early on, so I can understand that. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
Colleen, Tim Owen here. I remember attending a presentation you made at a DevCon, I think it was in the early 2000s, on the separation model, and I ended up using that in a film festival management solution when I converted that from FP5 to FP7. I think you mentioned at the very beginning that there's still circumstances in which you would use the separation model. And I wonder what those are from your perspective. I don't imagine that the solution you've just shown us uses that, but I would be interested in your general comments on the current applicability of the separation model.
It still has a life. It's a long conversation. That's a deep conversation as to when it is. And yes, this does use the separation model. Right. So again, but in the past, came in because there were technical challenges, right? But now with data migration, we don't have the technical challenges, but we still do have the business use case situations. And when you're talking about larger systems, oftentimes there are advantages to pulling things out and making them separate. So, and especially, it's usually the business process that determines whether you want, or whether or not you want to go with the separated model. I'm going to leave it at that because I could talk that for ages.
Well, I'll look forward to a continued discussion of that at some point, but I still find it's relevant in my own use case where I have not a solution as such, an off-the-shelf solution for film festivals, but a sort of a series of templates that I can fairly rapidly adapt to any film festival. And for that purpose, I found the separation model very useful at having just a separate data table and then an interface table linked to that. But anyway, I won't go any further into that. I'll look forward to maybe discussing the topic further with you at some point. So thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. As an avid book reader, I was fascinated to see how it can all be done from the standpoint of the bookshop and the FileMaker developers. So thanks again.
Sure.
Colleen, one last question, if I may, from another person who has a somewhat large vertical market solution. Do you have any stats on the number of tables and the lines of code?
I don't. I don't have stats on that.
Okay.
It's not terribly complex, right?
Well, it appears you've taken a lot of complexity and put it behind a nice user interface. So
right. So I mean, a lot of that goes into the scripts, and one of the things, for example, I was going to demo real quickly, and this goes to one of the difficulties that, or things that the other systems don't support, is when you're making purchasing decisions. The large vendors have different promotions, and those different promotions run at different time frames, and they have different rules. And in order to, again, get your margins where they need to be, you need to be able to take advantage of those. And tracking those and knowing as you're building a PO, you know, this doesn't need to be in the store right away, but I'd like to, when can I take advantage of this? This simple little promotions table, for example, Peter, you can probably speak to that more effectively than I can, but made a big difference in simply being able to, again, take advantage of promotions being offered by various vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I know of booksellers who will tell you that they very rarely take advantage of these things because they're so difficult to track and so difficult to do. But because you're, and I think what Colleen is trying to point out there is that we don't sort of create a PO and send it instantaneously. A PO is built over a period of time. You know, as one might require books. There's a difference between the urgent book you need for a customer and the book that you need to replenish your shelves. And when we're doing this especially for these with these backlist offers, we need to have an understanding of when that's going to be sent, and that could sometimes be 2 or 3 months out. So one needs to know that the offer is there and which books you're putting into that offer and not putting elsewhere. Does that make sense? That maybe was a little too confusing. I hope that.
Oh, sounds good. So
yeah, I
you're
think
actually holding a longer term PO for a longer period of time. Yeah. Okay.
And when it comes to, you know, a lot of things were automated and a lot of things are presented in a different manner to make it more advantageous for each of the users. Much of the actual work that was done there is not lines of code. It was conversations in drilling down to why do you need that? How do you need that? When do you need that? And with anyone who's done a job for a long time, if you ask them, what do you need? They'll tell you, they'll just reiterate the way they like to do things, the way they've always done things. And especially in the bookselling industry, one thing I'll say about the bookselling industry, they're really nice people. They don't like to complain. So when you ask them, what sucks about this? They don't want to tell you. They want to say, oh, I really enjoy this part of my job. I really like, X or Y. So it takes a lot, as I say, a lot of the real work and time was spent gleaning that out and trying to understand that information.
Well, thank you so much, Colleen. This has been really
one quick question.
No, Bob, we're already over time. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Well, okay.
gotta keep it on schedule here.
All right.
So maybe you can send a direct message to Colleen in the chat, and she can handle it there.
Yeah, okay.
So with that, it's time to move on to our last presenter. Sol is going to show us or do a deep dive on the data API and JavaScript. Sol, are you ready to share your screen?
Yep, I sure am.
Okay, take it away.
All right, thanks, Barry, appreciate it. Yeah, so my name's Sol Rodriguez, and I love coming to FMDiSC, just being a part of it, and I'm super honored to have the opportunity to share with you guys today. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and actually, I'm going to turn off my video here. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I want to go into a detailed look at parts of the data API. So in the beginning of the session, some of what I'll cover we've probably seen before, but my hope is to get deeper into the details of the documentation for the data API, because there are some sticking points that seem to trip people up. I know that I certainly experienced that when I was first in there. I will show examples via tools like Postman, which we've seen before, and we even saw some examples today with Kent's awesome presentation. But I'm also going to show some examples using HTML and JavaScript. And the goal, like I said, is to help orient you through some real-world usage of the data API, so that when you go back and check out the documentation yourself, you can relate it to whether it's Postman or HTML and JavaScript. And just quickly, a bit about me. I am a creative at heart, and like many other FileMaker users, I am a musician, and it's always fun to meet other FileMaker musicians. I haven't had a chance to jam with any of you yet, and I really can't wait to have that happen at some point. But I am also, I'm an in-house developer at a medical billing company. These are some of my babies here. And along the way, I have been FileMaker certified. I started using FileMaker consistently around FileMaker 11, and I got a few certs along the way. So what is the problem that I'm trying to solve here with this session? This question kept nagging at me. Why aren't more people using or talking about the data API? It feels like I've heard a lot about connecting outwardly from FileMaker to other APIs, whether it's something like Stripe or some of the things that we've talked about today, FogBuz, awesome examples. But far less I've heard people talking about using the actual FileMaker data API. So I started wondering, what's the deal here? And as I was thinking about it and having some informal conversations with other FileMaker developers, it seemed to me that there were three main reasons. And the first one kind of makes sense, right? The FileMaker client is fast and it gets the job done. That's, I get it. Sometimes that's all you need, or you already have something set up where you really don't need to be web facing, or you don't need to use a tool like the data API. You don't need custom web publishing. So the FileMaker client gets the job done. Another reason is we're all simply busy. Sometimes it seems daunting to learn a new skill set. Now, I would argue that at this day and age, learning HTML and JavaScript isn't what it used to be. And I hope to give you some examples to show you that today. But it still does take time. It still is learning a new skill set, right? And sometimes we just don't have time to do that. And then the third thing that came up often enough was that the FileMaker Data API documentation was confusing. The first two I can understand, like I said, but this third one is a tragedy, in my opinion. I would love to see the FileMaker community embrace the web and combine it with the amazing power and flexibility of FileMaker on the back end. Right. I really feel like FileMaker itself, you know, it's our it's our competitive advantage, right? It's that rapid application development environment that that makes FileMaker so special. Well, if you can combine something similar on the front end, on the web side, with FileMaker on the back side, I feel like it's like a secret weapon, and the world just needs to hear about it. So hopefully, my goal by the end of this session is that we can at least deal with this last issue, right? And make sure that nobody gets stuck here. So let's get into it. We have a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to go ahead and open the documentation, first of all. So what happens, I think, with the documentation, whether it's good or bad, for better or for worse, is when we get to the documentation, you know, you kind of start from the top, right? So you look at the overview, you see what this is, and it says the FileMaker Data API is an application programming interface that allows web services, blah, 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 right? This is very textbooky, and that's nice. This information is useful, but you know, as FileMaker developers, I tend to believe that most of us are very creative people, and this textbooky techie stuff is not where we want to really get started. At least it's not where I really want to get started. You know, if we go on and we decide we kind of gloss over that, here we have more techie stuff, FileMaker Data API architecture. Again, this is all very important information, but you know, where are the examples, right? So if my buddy was asking me, hey man, how do I use the Data API? I would not start with this. All right, so so I'm going to go ahead and pretend like you guys are my friends and that you invited me over for a beer and you asked me, you know, how do I use the Data API? Oops, excuse me. And so in order to do that, I think the first thing that I would do is I would say, all right, well, why don't you open your FileMaker database? So let's go ahead and do that. And I have my FileMaker database. Can you guys see this, by the way? Is this big enough on screen?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I have a simple contacts database here. This is a starter solution that you can get simply by going to create new contacts. It's exactly the default starter solution with a few records. Nothing fancy here, right? So what we need to do to make sure that our database works with the Data API is we need to have a user. Let's go ahead and go to the Manage Security window. And we need to make sure we have a user that has a privilege set that has access to the Data API. So here I have my user, and I created a custom privilege set. I just went to new and I created a custom one. And in that privilege set, the main thing that we're looking for is that we want to check this box, access via FileMaker Data API. This stuff is, all this stuff in the beginning here is probably review for many of you, but for those of you that have been you know, overwhelmed by the Data API, I hope that this is really useful, but I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as possible. So we need to check this box, and then it's also useful to have this box checked that requires re-authentication if the user has been dormant in the background for 10 minutes. So if you're connecting via the web and you haven't done anything, it'll automatically log you out. Of course, the privilege set security all is useful here, and you want to take advantage of it. If there's certain tables that you need to block, you can do that all here, and it all works with the Data API. So now we've got our database, we've got our user with Data API access via the privilege set. And another thing that has tripped people up is that sometimes they forget to turn on the Data API on the server. So let's go ahead and take a peek at the server. And I'm just going to log in here. On the connectors tab, we have the FileMaker Data API section here. And we just need to make sure that our FileMaker Data API is enabled, just like custom web publishing. But if you don't have this enabled, when you start using Postman to test, or you start, you know, doing actual coding, JavaScript, whatever, and you forget this, it can, you know, it can be one of those things that takes a minute just to realize. So that's basically it with setting up a database. Very easy. You know, I know that there's a lot of good information here, but man, it would have been nice if they could have just given us a quick deep dive like that. Just a quick example. So let's go ahead and go to Postman and we're going to look, I know that we've seen Postman today, but what I really want to do here in Postman is walk through how to connect or relate Postman to the documentation, so that when you're looking at the documentation, Postman makes sense. Because it seems to me that what's happened is we get exposed to Postman and it looks neat and it works, but how does that relate to the documentation, right? So if we go back to the documentation, I'm going to start with step one, which is basically in any solution, we need to authenticate first, right? Before we use our database, we have to log in. And so down here in this section where it says write FileMaker Data API calls, this is where we can connect to our database. Now, before we get into this, let me just take a quick moment to point something out here. This REST API call components, I think this, if we take just a moment to understand what this is all about, everything else is really going to kind of fall into place here. So if you're a note-taking type of person, this is definitely a place to take notes. What this is telling us is that a REST API call, or we can refer to it as a data API call or an HTTP method. I think FogBuz called it an HTTP request. These are all synonymous, but every API, REST API call has 4 components. It has the HTTP method type, which FileMaker Server understands 4 types, and it has HTTP headers, it has a URL, and then it has some parameters, right? So anytime that we're talking about creating a REST API call, no matter if it's using the data API or any other REST API call, you need to make sure that you collect this information. These are the 4 pieces of information, 4 components of a data API call, right? So if we look here, and we go back to Postman, I created let's just start from scratch here. I'm going to create a brand new session, and we can see here it has get. Now this is where we can specify our HTTP request type. Going back to the documentation, well, we understand what they call the components of an API call are. Let's go back here to the actual connection. This is connecting to our database. The FileMaker Data API uses an access token to define a connection to a database. And to log into a hosted database, we can use the HTTP post method, right? So if we go back to Postman, we can see that we need to choose post. And then next we have a place to put our URL, right? So let's go back to the documentation, and this is one of the funny things about the documentation here. This looks like a header, right? This does to this table. This doesn't look like something we're going to use. It looks like something that is meant to be a header for the rest of the information we're going to use, right? And if you're new to REST calls and APIs, this is not very clear what's going on here, in my humble opinion there. But it in fact is something that we need to use. It's the first component of any API call, is what method type, what HTTP method type we're going to use. Next, we have our URL. And here it's defined in the documentation as this line here. Now, this is really the first place where I feel like the documentation really stumbles. These other things are kind of a problem, but this example here, if we take this and we put this in Postman, it's not going to work, right? And so I really just wish that in order to facilitate beginning users like I was when I first jumped into this, for beginning users to know what to do, the documentation needs a little bit of help here. And so what is it that we need to do here? Well, the URL needs to point to our FileMaker server, right? How do we do that? Well, I suppose we could use our IP address here if we needed to. The assumption that I'm going to be making, since we're working from, eventually we're going to work from HTML and JavaScript, is that this is a web-based call, web-based HTTP call to the data API, right? So in order to point that to our FileMaker server, then of course we're going to be using an SSL certificate to encrypt that traffic. So I'm going to start with HTTPS:// and then I'm going to point it to my domain name. Now I have a custom domain name set up that I can use here. Oops. And that's fms.angularfm.com. So what's going on here? This custom domain name is pointing to my FileMaker server that I have sitting at a static IP, ready and waiting for any data API calls. Well, how do you do that? Let's go to the documentation and find out. Well, there's nothing here that says how to do that. So if you have gone through the documentation and tried to figure out, well, how do I actually set this up? You're going to have to do some digging on the Googles and figure this out yourself. And I really feel like this is, you know, the FileMaker community is so creative, and just with a little bit more of an example here, we could go a long way. So let's look at this. I don't really have time to break down the whole process, but I do want to give a general overview of how this works. How do I point a custom domain name to my server? So the big idea here is I have a FileMaker server, and it's sitting on my internal network behind an IP address. In this case, ideally, it's a static IP address. If you're not familiar with static IP addresses, they're just IP addresses that never change, right? So if you want a static IP address, you just call your internet service provider and pay an extra $5 or $10 a month, and they'll give you a static IP address. It's not a big deal. And once you have that static IP address, you can point your custom domain to that and be confident that it's never going to change. If you don't have a static IP address and it changes, then you may have an error when somebody tries to reach your server via a custom domain, right? So like I said, I'm not going to go through the details of how that works here for the sake of time. But if you're interested, I did create a blog post on my blog. It's discoverfilemaker.com. And you can go step by step here on how to point a web domain name to FileMaker server and the data API. And this takes you through whether you have your domain name sitting at a domain name registrar like GoDaddy, or even if you already have a website and you have a web host where you can create a custom, it's called a DNS pointer to point to your static IP. This will walk you through all the steps to do that so that we can get to the point where our custom domain name points to our FileMaker server. So now that we know that we have our HTTP method type here, and we're going to be pointing that HTTP method data API call to our FileMaker server, now we can actually use the documentation and the rest of this URL. So notice really quick here in the URL, we have a couple of italicized items. These are like variables where we get to input whatever, in this case, the database name is. And then at the end of our URL, we have the sessions keyword here. This keyword is almost like a feature set for the data API. So when we point our URL to the sessions feature set, it will handle sessions for us. And we'll see how different examples of that later on in a moment. So let's go ahead and grab this. And we're going to take this and put it in Postman. And we do need to update our version. I'm going to use the latest version and then our database name here. So the database name, if I go back to the database, is called Contacts Angular FM, and it is case sensitive. So let's go ahead and update that. Boy, when you're in front of all these people, typing all of a sudden becomes very difficult because nerves get to you. So you want to make sure I have that spelled and it's all case sensitive. That looks good. So the next thing that we need to deal with, the third component, we have our HTTP method type, we have our URL. The third component are the headers. And it says here we have content type application JSON, good to know, and our authorization. Okay, so we are trying to log in. So I'm going to focus here on this authorization, and it has another textbooky description of how to do authorization. A base 64 encoded string representing the account name and password to use to log into the hosted database. Okay, well, I'm going to have to figure out how to encode my account name and password in base 64. And going further, it says that our base 64 encoded string should follow the standard HTTP basic authentication scheme. What does all this mean? Well, it gives us a little hint here. The account name and password are separated by a colon. Okay, let's take this back to Postman. And here's where we might get stuck again. How do we do this? Well, fortunately, in this section under here, so just quickly, again, reiterating, we're relating the documentation to Postman. We have our HTTP method type here, we have our URL, and down here we have our headers, right? The auth is actually just another header, but Postman just gives us a nice little GUI interface here so that our password can be hidden and not exposed like the rest of the headers. So I'm going to click on auth because we're working on headers right now. And it gives us a type of header, right? And so going back to the documentation, it does say it's of the HTTP basic authentication scheme. Now, this isn't really clear from the documentation, but just to get through this quickly here, I'll show you some deeper examples in a moment. We do have the basic auth type. And when we choose that, it does give us our username and password field. And you can see that the password is obfuscated. And I have those already input here. And you can see that our headers went from 8 to 9. If I was to start this over, we could see that this was not, or this was 8 headers a minute ago until I clicked on auth. I should have mentioned that a moment ago, but we'll see what happens here in a second because it's kind of interesting. You can see that there are some hidden headers here that Postman takes care of for us. And here we have the authorization key, and we have basic with our base64 encoded information here. So if we were going to get rid of that, that auth header, a minute ago we had 8. Anyways, moving on. So it seems like the last piece of information that we need is our parameter, and it says an empty set of curly braces. For example, just the literal set of curly braces here. Now, once we get to our JavaScript code, we literally do need to do this, but Postman is nice and kind of does a lot of this stuff in the background for us. So you would think that at this point we could press send and it would work, but we are going to get an error here. Why are we going to get the error here? Let's go ahead and press send and see. So it says that we have an invalid content type of application octet stream, and this is the valid, these are the valid types. There's only one, application JSON. We saw that before, right? And we did see that in Kent's presentation as well, but here it's kind of unclear. It just seems like, okay, the HTTP header content type application JSON, that's good to know. It doesn't spell out that we actually need to use that as a header. And so what this is here is this is actually a key value pair. This is our key content type, and this is our value application JSON. So we can literally take this and copy and paste it into our headers. Here we have our key, and let's take this value here and let's paste that. Oh, needs to say JSON. I'm going to mess that up. And so now at this point, we should be able to send, and we should get the token that we're receiving back from the data API. And you can see it, this is just JSON that it sends back to us. It says our code is 0, which means no errors, and our message is okay. And in the response node of our JSON, we have a token node, which gives us this value. And this is the value that we can use to save, and on any further data API calls, instead of providing the username and password every single time, we can simply use this. And we're going to see that here in a moment. So once again, Postman, this is kind of a review, a refresher. I know we've seen Postman quite a few times, including earlier today with Kent's awesome presentation. But I hope that this kind of helps to relate Postman to the documentation, because the documentation, again, it leaves something to be desired, especially if you're a newbie. I guess if you're very well versed in APIs, maybe this is enough information and you can get through it quickly. But for the rest of us, I hope that this has really been helpful. So where are we here? Let's see. So let's go beyond Postman. And what we want to do is we want to look at some real world HTML and JavaScript code to see how it works and to see that it's not that scary. So here I have a code editor. And in my code editor, I've set up a really quick basic website to work through this. And let me just show you that website here. Oops, let's go back to the beginning, you can see I just have a simple header here and a login form. It has a username field, a password field, and a button, right? Nothing too fancy. If I go to my my code editor, here is the HTML for my login form. You can see I have my form, my username field, my password field, and the login button, right? And really quickly, I just want to point out what I'm doing here. So obviously this is HTML. I've been talking about using JavaScript. Specifically, I'm actually using TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is really just JavaScript with a few boundaries and rules. Let me make this bigger so you can see it here. And the boundaries kind of help you to stay in your lane, right? And it just kind of keeps, once you have a really big project, it keeps things, it kind of helps you not make mistakes because it will point out mistakes as you go. So, but essentially it really is just JavaScript. And so what I've done also in the background is I've installed the Angular framework. I think some of you guys from FMDiSC have heard me talk about Angular before. And what Angular is just a set of, it's kind of like a set of script steps for you. So one way you could think of it is, imagine FileMaker was just a database without the script steps, right? And you could go out and get any other third-party script steps that you wanted. Let's say Google had their own script steps for the FileMaker database, and Facebook had its own script steps, and they all are kind of the same. They basically do the same stuff, but different companies have different ways of approaching it, right? That's basically what Angular is here. Whereas JavaScript is to FileMaker, Angular is to our script steps. So I hope that kind of helps to understand how Angular is used. But I'm going to take advantage of Angular here to make some stuff happen pretty quickly. So let's see. What I've got here is an authenticate method. So in JavaScript, they call them functions, JavaScript functions or JavaScript methods. This is just like a script. Pretend I just created an authenticate script in FileMaker. And here in the parentheses, I have my script parameters, right? So I'm going to be expecting, I'm using get script parameter to get the username and the password. And that's coming from our login form in HTML, right? And then once I've defined my script parameters in the parentheses, then I have my curly braces, and I call this my do stuff section. So whenever you see curly braces, it means you get to do stuff here, right? So this would be like the body of your FileMaker script if we're relating it to FileMaker. And in a FileMaker script, one of the things that you might do up front is you might create some variables. You might, establish some variables right up front, right at the very beginning, right? So that's what I'm doing here. I'm using the const keyword, which is basically just like set variable. So I'm going to set a variable named endpoint, and I'm going to set that variable to what in this case our URL, right? So I want to relate this again to the documentation. So of course we have our four components of any API call. We have our HTTP method type, we have our URL, we have our headers, and we have our parameters. The response is just what we expect to receive on a response, right? We saw that before a minute ago. So let's relate that here to our JavaScript code. I'm going to set up the URL first because it's just super easy, right? It's literally just a string. And we saw that it's exactly the same thing that we put into Postman. Here we first have our domain name, our custom domain name, and then we have the rest of our URL pointing to the sessions endpoint, which accesses the sessions features on the data API. And then next, I created a set variable named auth, and I'm going to set that to the value of basic with a space, and then our base64 encoded username and password. Once again, on Postman, we can see what that looks like if we look at these hidden headers right here. And so literally, we have a key value pair where our key is authorization and our value is the word basic with a space, and then our base64 encoded information, right? So I need to recreate this in my JavaScript code. How do I do that? Well, as you probably know, in FileMaker, we can use the base64 encode function to do that, right? Base64 encode, and it says base64, and then it has some parentheses, and then we can put some data in here. And let's just say we were putting our username and a colon and a password. And what do we get? Well, we get this, right? And if we needed to put basic, the word basic in front, we could concatenate that with a space, and I guess I want to capitalize that. But this is basically what we're after, right? Well, we can do the same thing in JavaScript, but instead of the base64 encode function, JavaScript has one that's it's simply BTOA. So the BTOA function in JavaScript is exactly the same as the base64 function in FileMaker. So what's going on here? Well, I'm taking my incoming script parameter of username, and I'm concatenating. That's what the plus symbol is in JavaScript. I'm concatenating it with a literal colon, and then I'm going to concatenate the password, and all of that lives inside of my parentheses here, which is going to become base64 encoded, right? Then I've got my literal text here, basic with a space, and I'm just concatenating it with that base64 encoded string. So all of this put together is what I need, going back to the documentation, to satisfy this. This is a header, and this is this is a key in a key value pair for our header, and this is our value, and our value is the word basic, space, the account name and password separated by a colon, and base64 encoded. So this example here in our documentation, I guess effectively gives you all the information that you need, but it's a long way away from getting to this, right? So again, my hope here is that going kind of into a deep dive of the documentation helps you to relate that documentation to real world examples. So we've got our URL, we've got our the information that we need for authentication header, authorization header. And what else do we need? Well, we do need the HTTP type, and you'll see that's down here. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then the last thing that we need is the parameters, right? And so for our login to our database, it says an empty set of curly braces. Now, Postman took care of that for us earlier, but if you're using actual JavaScript code, you need to explicitly define that. So I probably should have named this parameters. So I'm setting a variable named parameters, and I'm setting it to the literal empty curly braces, right? But there's a reason why I named it body, and I'm going to talk about that right now. So this is just setting up a bunch of variables, just like you might do in a script in FileMaker. And then down here is where we're actually going to do something else. What are we doing? Well, ultimately, we're sending a command to the data API, right? And let me quickly talk about that. Let's see. Let's say we have a command prompt here. And let's pretend that this command prompt is the FileMaker server data API, and it's sitting there waiting for you to do something, right? It's sitting there waiting for you to give it a command, and it's going to give you a response when you give it a command. So let's just say I give it the dir for directory command, and when I enter that, it's going to give me a list of all the items that live in that directory, right? That's essentially what's going on with the data API. It's just sitting there waiting for you to give it a command. And of course, the documentation noted that it recognizes 4 different kinds of commands. That was up here. It recognizes the post command, the get command, the patch command, and the delete command, right? So what we want whenever somebody runs the authenticate script, we want to return the value of whatever that command is, right? And so that's what I'm saying here. When somebody runs the authenticate script, we're going to set up these variables, and we're going to return the value of whatever happens here. This is basically like doing a perform script inside of a script. So we're going to call another script, and then we're going to take the results of that script, and we're going to give it to the main authenticate script. So far, so good. So what's happening here? Well, Angular, this is where I'm taking advantage of Angular. Angular has kind of a, you could say like a modular set of scripts called the HTTP client. And that HTTP client gives you scripts like post, get, patch, delete, that all you need to do is provide some of the relevant data. So we're going to provide the URL, we're going to provide the parameters down here, we're going to provide the headers, and it takes care of the rest of it for us, right? So back in the day, in order to do a data API call, you had to do something called AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript and XML, right? Very techy and laborious. With things like frameworks like Angular, it does it for us. All we need to do is, I want to use in the set of HTTP client scripts, I want to use the post script. And when I hover over here, it actually spells out what we need to do. And it says, okay, well, in the post script, the first thing you need is your URL. This string definition here is part of TypeScript, and it's just saying that the URL has to be a string. It can't be a number. If I sent it a number, it would holler at me and it would say there was an error, right? So this is what TypeScript does, but we can ignore that. So the first thing that we need is our URL, and then, then we need our body. And this is the reason why I named it body instead of parameters. And that's of type any. And then there's some options that are optional. This question mark means that we have some optional options here. And one of those optional options are the headers. And headers are optional. We can put them here, or we don't have to put them here. And it's of type HTTP headers. Now, HTTP headers is something that Angular gives us, and it automatically sets it up. So what I'm doing here, to reiterate, is I'm using a set of modular scripts that Angular gives us, and I'm going to use the post script, and I'm just going to give it our URL, which we've defined here. I'm going to give it our body, our parameters, which we've defined here. And then I'm going to give it some headers. And it basically spells it out that all we need to do is say we want to create some new headers, and then use this set command to set a key value pair again. And here's my key value pairs. And the key value pair for my authorization, here's the key, and then this is the value that we established up here, right? So this is it. This is all we need to duplicate the same thing that we were doing in Postman. So let's just take a look at that. I'm going to go back to my website, and we're going to see that in action. And I've got my user. You might recognize this from when we set up the database. And let me type in my password, and we'll log in. And there we go. I logged in, and my database is sending back via the Filemaker Data API my list of awesome guitar players here who I absolutely love. And if you guys have not listened to them, this is another place to take notes. So just to prove that this is live, let's go back to the database, and let's go ahead and add a new, let's add a new record here. And we're going to make this Mr. Jimmy Page. Oops, I guess I messed that up. Jimmy Page, and he's from the Led Zepp company, right? Boy, it's really funny how when you're doing a presentation, you all of a sudden can't type. And so if we look at that here, we have our list, and going back here, if I refresh this page, we should see a new record show up, and there it is. So you can see that this is live. All of this is happening through the Data API. Now, so far, what we've looked at is we've only looked at the authentication, right? We haven't looked at how are we getting this data from the Data API. So what's going on here? Well, whenever what's happening is whenever this page, this section right here, this table, this dashboard and this table is loaded, it automatically goes out to FileMaker, and it just does a find request for anybody and any record that has something filled out in the last name. So let's just take a peek at that. I'm going to go to my dashboard HTML here. We can see that here I just have my dashboard list of contacts. Here's my table. If you recognize HTML, this is pretty basic here. And the way that Angular works is that every piece of HTML gets attached to it scripts, right? So you can put something here. You don't have to put something here. But one of the options for that script is something called on initialization. This is Angular on init on initialization. So anytime that our HTML gets loaded, this is going to run. And so what is running actually? Well, what I have here is I have this script right here, get contacts, and it's being called from another location. And that's all that this means here. But my get contacts script, if we look at that, and if we take a peek, it looks very similar to the authorization script, right? I've got my script name here. This is my script parameters. In this case, I don't have any script parameters. And then I've got my do stuff curly brace. So this is where the body of my script is going to be if you're relating it to FileMaker script. And then I'm setting up some variables, and then I'm going to run my post request, giving it variables, and I'm still using my headers here. And I still have my authorization header, and this is almost exactly the same, except this is actually going to fetch my my data in the table. So far so good. I know I got to wrap it up here pretty soon. How much time do I have left, Barry?
You've got about 12 minutes, but
Okay.
you can go over a little bit.
Okay, perfect. So let's take a peek at what's going on here. The first thing is I defined my endpoint. Now this is almost exactly the same as the other one, right? Here I'm pointing it to my FileMaker server, and actually what we should do is let's go to the documentation and look at what a perform find script step looks like. So here we have a perform find, and it's of type HTTP method post. Right. And so we didn't have to change anything here. And here's our URL. It's almost exactly the same, but it includes a section for layouts, for the layout name. And then the endpoint here is find. So this is going to give us our feature set for performing a find. Everything else is basically the same. Our headers, we still have our content type as application JSON, and we have an authorization header. This time, however, instead of it being a basic authentication, it's a bearer authentication, because we come bearing a token, right? And I'll show you how we collect that in a moment. But just know that that we in the process we will have collected that token to use here, and then we have our parameters. Now for the authentication request, the HTTP request for authentication, we just had an empty set of curly braces, but this here actually has some significant information in JSON, right? And actually there are a number of different things that we could put here. It says optional parameters include specifying omit requests, sort order. We can start with a specific record, like on an offset. We can limit the number of records. Let's say you only wanted 25 records at first. And if we look at that, it is still existing within a set of curly braces because that's JSON. But then what we have here is we have a key and a value, right? And then we have another key and a value. Now, it just so happens that the values here break down into a couple more key value pairs, right? But essentially what we have here is one key value pair and another key value pair, right? So I don't need, let's look at this here for a second. This first key value pair is for a perform find, is just like you would think of it in FileMaker, is our field name. And then we are looking for the actual text equals surgeon. We might put that in FileMaker find. And then the next item that we're going to place in our find is in the work state field. We're going to place New York, but we want to add something. We want to omit that, right? So we want to omit New York. So that's what's going on here. Now, in my case, if we go back, we can see that I'm only going to use, as I mentioned, the last name field, and I'm just looking for any record that has something in the last name field, right? So let's just go back up here a little bit more. We've defined all 4 components of our data API call. We have our URL. We saw that the find request for FileMaker Data API is still looking to use a post method type. And we have our authorization header, right? And we're going to set it up here. Now let's talk about that. We talked about the URL, it's pointing to the same place, but we added a layout, and then the endpoint here is going to our find endpoint, and that gives us our find feature set, right? So here next is something new, and I'm going to set a variable named token, and I'm going to set that equal to this. What's going on here? Let me just I intended to do this earlier, and I guess I got nervous and jumped ahead of myself. So let's go back to our login component. And this is, as I mentioned, the way that Angular works is you have your HTML, and then any given HTML has some TypeScript that goes along with it if you want to perform some kind of scripting, right? So our login form has a login script in the background. And what's happening is we're simply taking the username and the password, we're assigning it to username and password variable, and then we're going to call our authenticate script, just like you would in FileMaker, right? We're going to call our authenticate script, and we're going to send it our username and password as parameters, right? And so we saw how that worked here in our original example. So what happens after that? Well, in our original example, I mentioned that we're going to return a set of values, right? So here, when we return the set of values, we're going to subscribe to that returned set of values, right? This is how Angular works. So we called the script, we sent it some parameters. Now we're going to subscribe to whatever it returns, and what it returns, we're going to set to its own variable. Right? It's called results from auth service. Now we can actually look at what it returns, and it should be very similar to what we see in Postman, the same way that Postman gives us our little information down here, right? So let's take a look at that. What I'm doing here is, this is in JavaScript, you can log to the console, and the console is just every browser nowadays has some developer tool sets, and let's take a peek at that. If I press F12, it shows me a set of developer tool sets. There's a bunch of them here. I'm just going to show you the console for now. And the console is literally like a console. I can interact with it here, or I can send something to the console. So my code is going to send the results of my authentication to it so we can take a peek, right? So let me save this. And let's relog in and see what happens. I want to show you how that looks. So here I've got my web user, and let's put my password. So here you can see something came up, and this is our JSON response. And you can see we have our code is 0, our message is okay. We have our JSON response node and the token node with a new token here, right? Because we're doing this programmatically with JavaScript, we can then take this value, which is the value we sent to the console, and I take that here, and I'm drilling down to the response node, to the token node, which is the same thing that we're seeing here. And I'm just going to assign this to a variable called token, right? So in my token variable, now we have collected that token, and down here, this is something that we can also do in JavaScript and HTML, is we can store that in the browser memory, right? So it's called session storage. I'm going to set an item. This is just a command for our browser, and I'm going to name it token. It's, even though I'm using a variable here in JavaScript, this is going to be in our browser. I'm going to store a token, named token, and it's going to be set with that same value, right? So going full circle, when we go to our contacts and I need to collect that token so I can authenticate without a username and password, I'm going to create a new local variable. I'm going to say set variable. Again, I'm calling it token because it's a different set of scripts here. This is like using the same variable name, just in a different script, right? And I'm going to set it to the value of my session storage. And I'm going to get the item instead of setting it. That's called token. So once I get that token, I can use it in my authentication, which is right here. So this is really what I got so excited about when I started using Angular, is that as a FileMaker developer, I can understand this stuff. Now, when I first look at it, absolutely, it was intimidating. But when you kind of break it down, it's not that far away from using FileMaker scripts and functions, right? So we've got our URL, we've got the header information that we need for our headers, we've got our param. Now, let's go back really quick to the documentation. And for our params, what I did here is I literally took this and I copied it and pasted it into my script and into my script on in my code editor. Right now, if you've spent a lot of time with JSON before and you've dealt with these quotation marks, you know that it can be a pain because you have to escape each one of these quotation marks. Otherwise, your code thinks that it's not a literal quotation mark, right? That you need to take the time to escape these, and if you miss one, it kind of messes everything up, right? Well, that's typically been true historically in JavaScript as well. However, in TypeScript, we have this cool little feature called the backtick, which allows you to use a backtick instead of a quotation mark to make everything inside the backticks actual literals, right? And now, to be fair, JavaScript has now included this feature, which is really awesome. But for a long time, that feature was not available, right? You had to go through and escape each one of these. But so what I did is I literally took this and I copied it and I pasted it in here and I just kind of updated it, right? So instead of using the group field name and this value for my search, I just changed it to my last name field name. And then I'm going to go ahead and keep the sort, and I'm going to sort by last name and first name, right? Down here, everything stays the same. If we look at the documentation, our post type, our HTTP method type is still post. We put together the URL. We have our header of content type application JSON. We have our authorization header with our information that we need there, and we have our parameters. So at this point, this should all work, right? And as we've seen, let's see. Going back here, every time I refresh this, let me just close that. Every time I refresh this, it's going to pop up, right? Because what I'm saying here in my dashboard HTML, every time I load my dashboard HTML, it's going to say, go run the get context script, and then I can use that to display that information. So far, so good. I know I'm running out of time here, but I just want to quickly look at one other thing here. Now, we've looked at authenticating or logging in via the Data API. We've looked at doing performing a find request. And really quick, I just want to look at how to create a record. And the reason I want to take a peek at this, even if we just look at it in the documentation, is because you're going to see a pattern here, and it's really all the same, right? We have our 4 pieces of information that we need, our 4 components of an HTTP request. The first is the HTTP method type. Again, it's post. There are some Data API calls that use get, and it will note that when it's necessary, but we know in this case, if we want to create a record, we're going to use the method type post. We have our URL, which is almost exactly the same, except it has a different endpoint, in this case, records, which gives us the records feature set. And we have our headers. Again, it's the content type application JSON. And again, just like when we were doing a find request, it's our authorization with our bearer of a token. And then the only difference here is the parameters, really. Everything else is exactly like our perform find, except of course the endpoint here, and the way that our parameters are set up. So whereas we were using, when we were back here, let's see, here we to do a find, we used a query in our key and then value pair. Here we're using the term field data as our key. Right, so this tells FileMaker that, okay, we're going to create it when you're on the records endpoint and you use the field data key here. Whatever values come after it, it knows that it needs to create a new record. So it's a little bit different. You can see here that after instead of brackets here, where we listed, let's say if I wanted to put another value here in our query, I would have done it like this. We can see that for creating a record, we don't have that. We just have one set of curly braces, and then we have our field and our value. So, and actually what's really interesting is if I just want to, just for kicks, let's just see, since everything else stayed the same except for this, we can literally just change this. So I'm going to we don't need the sort at all. So let's just get rid of the sort. And here, and we can get rid of this. Well, what I'm going to do here is manually hard code a new record, right? So let's see. In the last name field, I'm going to put, who's another great guitar player? Let's use Angus Young. And the way that it looks, if we want to get exact details, right? We have our field data and our colon, and then our open curly brace, and then we just have our quotation marks and key value pair here, right? So I have last Young with a comma, and then we'll do first name, and that's going to be Angus. Oops. And that's it, right? So if I save this, what should happen now is when we refresh this page, it should automatically create that that person, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to refresh this page. Now, why aren't we seeing anything here? Because we've changed the get contacts script to, instead of getting contacts, excuse me, we actually are, oh, you know what? Did I change this? I didn't change this. I need to change this to, what was it? The documentation says it was records, I think. Is that right? Records. Okay, so let's save this and we'll go back. And if we refresh this, we don't see anything, because what we're doing now is when this page loads, we're creating a record, right? We're not asking it to list. We're not doing a perform find. So if we go to our database, what do you know? I did it twice. And so it created that record for us. So all in all, that's basically it. This is what I wanted to show you. I hope that spending a little bit of time here doing a deep dive into how the data API documentation works, we can see how it applies to real world examples like Postman and JavaScript, HTML, and you can see how in the JavaScript and HTML, it's really not that foreign as a FileMaker developer, right? And I'd love to encourage everyone to look at it, to use it. Imagine taking your existing FileMaker project and putting a web-based interface on it. I mean, that Brilliant Books was amazing, and I was just kind of daydreaming about how cool it would be to rebuild an interface to equal that in the web using this, and taking advantage of the data API for that. So I'm going to stop here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to shoot.
Hi, Sol. This is Dave Boroff. I just want to say that was a fantastic, great demonstration. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave.
No questions.
All right. Let's see. It looks like there may have been some stuff in the chat. Let me take a peek here.
Well, I have a suggestion.
Absolutely, Bob.
Well, I think you need to take lessons from Dave Knight and slow talking.
Yeah, you know what? I appreciate that.
A great presentation. I just couldn't resist.
No, you know what? The reason why I decided to go ahead and talk quickly is because I knew that I had a lot to go through, and I wanted to get through all of that. And I know that every time I'm in front of you guys, I mean, we've got you guys, just brilliant people here. I'm looking, we've got Alan and Anton and Dave, and of course, Wim was here, and Christian Schmitz, and earlier I met Chris Moyer. I mean, this is quite an intimidating group. So I do apologize if I spoke very quickly, but there was some.
No, it'll be recorded. We can all parse it.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I did go through it quickly because there was a lot of stuff to cover. And in fact, there was a lot more that I cut out.
I know.
Any more questions from anybody?
Thank you all for the nice comments. I appreciate it.
That's fantastic.
Thanks all. Great presentation. So we're all going to refer to the recording here at some point in the future. So I'm going to stop the recording now. I'm going to keep the meeting going for anybody who wants to just hang out and, talk or whatever.